Are we grifters? Should we get that out of the way first? Because you know that's coming if we start pointing fingers at everybody else.
Well, Free is.
Free's a bit grifty.
Yeah, but I'm a libertarian, so what do you expect?
It's all about the money.
Buy my shit.
It's like, these grifters are disgusting, but if you do want to buy Nihilist for Independence merchandise...
Do you believe in nothing? Go to nihilist-for-indie.myteespring.co. Wow, that's the worst URL ever.
Yeah, you need to change that. That's fucking dog shit.
Or don't. It doesn't matter.
Nothing matters. Anyway, right, let's get into this thing. So, grifters.
Grifters were con artists. The guy that persuades you to buy his watch in a bar and you think you're buying a Rolex and you're actually just buying a cheap piece of shit. That was your traditional grift. But we're now in an era where that's been turned into a high-level political trapeze act. Let's start with Donald Trump pretending he's won the election and fundraising and sending out these emails. They've hit the fever pitch of the third letter that you get from Tesco's when you overstayed in their car park in terms of what's going to happen to you if you don't respond now and pay. And they're taking the money, and unless your donation to the Save Trump's Election campaign email is more than $8,000, most of it's actually just going in his bank account.
My girlfriend, she was one of the people that righteously was part of the arena, not scam, it wasn't a scam, but they signed up saying, yep, I'll attend your rally, Trump.
Okay, this was his first rally in 3 months because of the pandemic. Didn't entirely go to plan, did it?
No, certainly not. The crowds were the biggest issue because they had boasted of 1 million people registering to go to this rally. In actual fact, the total number was 7,000 people. And clearly, those early numbers, the registrations are up over 1 million people, is what got the president's hopes up, got the team's hopes up. Turns out that's a lot of people registering via K-pop, the Korean pop phenomenon. They were encouraging people to register, take a ticket and not show up. Same with TikTok teens. Look, both of those groups won't vote, but it's a problem for the campaign moving forward.
She's now on the email list.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, these emails, it's not like one every now and again. I mean, it's multiple times a day yelling at her, saying, give us your money. As you say, it's not even a clever grift. This is just shouting at people on the street, going, I am the victim, give me some money. But they're not victims. That is the grift. It's framing themselves as victims when they're not. That is the con, I think, these days.
They've got something like, I think 150 million quid in since the election. So to a certain extent, the reason that Donald Trump is not conceding is because he's financially better off losing but pretending that he's won and that he needs to fight because these idiots keep giving him money.
We were saying let's start with Trump. Could we start with religion? Is it the ultimate grift? And is it the merging of politics and religion that has led to the super grift?
The ultimate grift, yeah.
That is a bit of a differentiation, particularly with Scotland, where we don't really have the same God and the state being all wrapped up together. We don't really have that in this country. That is quite American. And I think that if you were raised over there, and I wasn't, so if you're an American, feel free to say that I'm talking shit. But if you were raised in a culture where believing in, for lack of better wordage, wacky bollocks from a young age and being convinced that it's true, and not just convinced it's true, but being convinced that it requires funding, you must pay for the wacky bollocks. So when they get into politics, it's like, well, this is wacky bollocks, but so is the other thing, and I'm giving money to that, so why not give money to this? They're not trained to think critically.
Yeah, so the odd thing for me is that they have this pronounced separation of church and state built into their constitution, and they are the least separated country in the world. Iran probably has better separation of church and state. Like, the idea that somebody can be an atheist and be a successful politician in America is unheard of, although I don't believe for 1 second that Trump believes in God. But he pretends he does. Everybody has to pretend they do. It's bizarre.
Did you see the footage of that crazy preacher saying, like, I heard that Joe Biden won the election, and then just starts laughing psychotically in front of this congregation, who then all awkwardly start laughing as well.
The media said what? The media said Joe Biden's president. Ha 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 ha
Pretty sure that guy has a private jet. I'm sure that's the same guy. He's like extremely wealthy.
Without the airplane that we have that I bought from Tyler Perry, and I didn't pay anywhere. Tyler's one of the greatest guys. He made that airplane so cheap for me, I couldn't help but buy it.
Well, my question then, okay, all right, but I want to get to the demons, because people are very concerned about that comment.
Give me a chance here, Inside Edition. I love your eyes.
Okay, again, getting back to the comment. You said that you don't like to fly commercial because you don't want to get into a tube with a bunch of demons. Do you really believe that human beings are demons?
No, I do not. And don't you ever say I did. We wrestle not with flesh and blood, but principalities and powers.
Can you explain what you meant by that term then? Just explain, because it's really simple. You said you didn't want to get into a tube with a bunch of demons. What did you mean?
Well, let me ask you. Galatians chapter 3. If you belong to Christ, then are you Abraham's seed and heirs according to his promise. And his promise was great wealth. Glory to God. I love Inside Edition. I love the people on it. And it thrills me to get a chance to have my face on Inside Edition.
Thank you very much, Reverend. You have a nice day.
He is off his rocker, or he's just a great worker, and they're terrible marks. That's the other way to look at it.
I feel a bit awkward about being unkind about people who have genuine beliefs, even if they're a bit strange or silly, because if they sincerely hold them and they're not doing anybody else any harm, then it's none of my business. If they sincerely hold them and they are doing other people harm, then it's my business. Or if they insincerely hold them and then they're making other people do things, or they're inspiring other people to do things who do sincerely believe them, then it's my business, if that makes sense. Believe what you want as long as you're not annoying other people.
Yeah, so the way that I always narrow this down is that if you say, I can't do that because of my religion, that's fine. None of us will have a problem with you. However, if you come on going, you can't do that because of my religion, now we'll have an issue.
Yes.
And that's the simplest way to put it. You know, if you are religious, we don't dislike you, we don't hate you. As long as you're not coming up and trying to fuck up our lives, then we'll have a problem.
I think part of it, if you want to be a true grifter, is you need to know that the watch you're selling is fake. The same would be true of religious or political figures as well. If they are genuinely sincere about their bollocks and they really genuinely believe it, then you've got to give them some credit. It's not a pure grift. The pure grift is when you know you're talking shite and you're selling the fake watch, just doing it for the cash.
Forgive me for using professional wrestling terminology in this podcast, but work and shoot. So work is when something is fake, when it's storyline or whatever. A shoot is when something is real. But there is the phenomenon of people working themselves into a shoot. So something that starts off as a pure grift, they start to buy what they're selling, and it becomes that whole you don't get high on your own supply kind of thing. And that fascinated me more than anything else about 21st century politics, because I would love to know, does Nigel Farage actually believe what he says? And we did a podcast, Nigel Farage, and I zoned in on exactly that. Is he for real? Or is he just the kid in the playground that told some racist jokes and got attention for it and has made a career off of doing that? They start knowing, yeah, this is fake, but then how many years go by and the next thing you know, you completely believe it. There's almost categories of grift and grifter that are out there. So we've mentioned Trump, and we talked about the religious types that are pro-grifters, they're career grifters. But then the thing that's become very popular now is to transition from having a former career into just being a grifter. That this is something where, you start off being a writer or an actor or a musician potentially, and
are we talking about Lawrence Fox?
Yeah, I think I'm talking about a lot of people, but I think he's become the poster boy for it, yes.
I thought you were going to start talking about a certain Irish sitcom writer.
I mean, I could be talking about an Irish sitcom writer. I could be talking about Lawrence Fox, the guy that once you can't get the 10 other actors that you had in mind for the part, you're like, right, oh fuck it, we'll go to the pound shop and get him.
I think with these two characters, Lawrence Fox and Graham Linehan, are probably in the category of people who have messed up in such a way that they've made themselves from like a reasonably popular, middle of the road kind of a character in their career to just be unemployable. They're just a hate character. And the grift has come because of that. It's not as if they sought out to do a grift. It's just the fact that they now have no other avenue of speaking to anybody.
Even J.K. Rowling's getting a wee bit... she's not quite fully made the transition yet, but it's edging that way. Graham Linehan, he's done it. I mean, he's just gone like, fuck being an artist. Well, I don't know if you call him an artist, but he's just given up on his dreams and just become full-on grift.
I think his missus might have left him. I mean, he seems to have had some sort of total mental breakdown, it would seem. I just found myself thinking, why do you care? I mean, my understanding is that with him, that it came about because he wrote that episode of the IT Crowd where he has a trans woman in it and she ends up in a fist fight, and the trans community, not incomprehensibly, took offence at it. It's typical. It's what Stephen was saying to us, is, that trans people are just the butt of jokes. It happens so often. The end of one of the Bridget Jones films, for instance, which I'm ashamed to admit I've watched, but there we are. Trans people are just used as lazy jokes. That's actually a guy.
Just to clarify what Tucker's just touched on there, we had Stephen Payton on this podcast, and you can follow Stephen at Stephen Payton 1234 on Twitter. We talked about the whole trans issue in detail, and you can find that episode in the archives. But that point about most times in entertainment media, they are deployed as a joke. And really only in the last few years has that really begun to noticeably change in mainstream, with certain representation now occurring where they are just characters. They're not joke characters. But to tie back to Graham Linehan, I mean, yes, as you say, that it was a very, at best, clunkily deployed. I don't even want to refer to it as a joke. I mean, it just didn't really work, and I think people were rightly offended by it.
And what happened was the trans community complained. You get to see how fragile someone's ego is, because clearly Graham Linehan was somebody who was used to poking fun at the church and was not used to anybody in the, shall we say, more liberal side of things ever complaining about his work. And rather than take on board the fact that, do you know what, maybe I was thoughtless here, maybe I was insensitive, and maybe I shouldn't have done that. Instead, he seems to have set himself on a course of a 10-year campaign to disparage trans people because they complained about 5 minutes of one of his episodes of one of his sitcoms. And you think, maybe you're not that well as a person.
Yeah.
That's your response.
I think because there is so much to talk about with Graham Linehan. The thing that I find so fascinating about him is the fact that he is a writer. And my instinct, I'm not a writer, but I would think if I were to try to do that, my instinct would be to try and explore these political issues by writing situations. Like, I wouldn't just be on Twitter yelling at the world. And I just think that if you started to sit down and really write a sitcom or just any kind of TV show centered around the concept of a cis individual is sharing a flat with a trans person, but they don't know they're trans, let's say, but that's the setup, that they end up doing a spaced-esque flat share, and that is revealed. I think that if you actually started to write trans characters as human beings, as characters, Graham Linehan would very quickly realise that he's wrong, because I don't know how you could tell that story and have the trans character be the villain. I cannot fathom how that would play out when you have two human beings connecting on a human level for that to be the conclusion of it. So from a writing perspective, I don't think he's that good. I'm going to ballsily go out there and fucking say this, that I think that the guys that do South Park, and they are absolutely about pushing buttons and offending people, they will say that. But even when they tackle things like religion, they do tackle it from all sides. So the Book of Mormon musical, for example, Mormons go and see it a lot because actually it doesn't have the message Mormonism is bad. It makes fun of it and says this is silly, but in the context of the story, actually, it's the Mormons are the heroes of the story. So we're making fun of them, but not fuck this is shit. Whereas all of Graham Linehan's comedy, that is the undertow of it. It's picking something that he personally doesn't like and just dunking on it.
And when that's the Catholic Church, we can all get behind that.
I think that to come back to something that you said earlier, Tucker, and talking about religion, I think that's what we're saying, that there are the genuine believers, and they're not hurting us. So there is that kind of line where, what do you say here? So if we were to write something, our instinct would come back to that philosophy of, if your religion says that you can't do a thing, then okay. But if you start going around enforcing your religion, then that's a problem. So there's an angle for the comedy there that should be taken, whereas Graham Linehan's comedy is very centred on, this is shite, fuck this. And I don't think that's actually that good. I can understand it gives you a chuckle, but it bugs me that actually, even at his regular job, I just don't think he's that good. And I think that might be the core of the grifting problem, because Lawrence Fox suffers from this as well, where the core thing that's supposed to be what you do, and what do you do when you're maybe just not that great at it?
Making fun of the Catholic Church is not difficult, and let's face it, it's fun too. And, I loved Father Ted. It was great. I liked the IT crowd. Bits of it were absolutely genius. But it strikes me that it was just the first time that anybody from what he viewed as his side had complained about him, and he was incapable of processing the criticism.
I think that's where the South Park guys are different. They did an episode on the Catholic Church, which I really liked, and the whole episode is centred on the fact that the character Butters befriends the local priest, and nothing weird happens. So the whole setup of the episode is to make you think they're going to do the paedophile thing, and they do get into some of that in it, but they again take the time to highlight the fact that this priest that Butters befriends is a genuinely good human being. There are other rapist characters in the episode, but again, taking the time to make the point that not everybody that's into this is a dick. And I think that's the sort of nuance that I think a lot of Graham Linehan's comedy lacks. He wants the world to be much more simple than it is. He doesn't want to understand the trans issue. That overcomplicates shit. Fuck those people, that's his take. It's easier for him to live in a world where every Catholic is insane. And I just think that is kind of lame sometimes.
And I think with a lot of these kind of mental preachers and mega churches and things like that in America, I don't doubt that for most of them, they kind of believe in God in as much as they're capable of. They've been brought up in that way and that they've gone into it. But then when the money starts to roll in from shouting Jesus on the internet, they don't ask themselves whether or not what they're doing is in keeping with what they say they believe. And so it's the hypocrisy that's the issue, isn't it?
I was going to say with Graham Linehan, just that I'm interested about that journey that almost comes full circle with him, where it's like, look at these science-denying cultist people, and watching him then become a variant of the very thing that he was mocking to begin with.
There's kind of an assumption that the grift has necessarily has to do with money, and I think that's not necessarily the case for some of these guys, where it's more about notoriety, being the head of some kind of faction. It's a kind of narcissistic thing. They want to be known for something. Guys like Linehan and Lawrence Fox probably screwed up their career to such an extent that they're going to have to just make money out of this from now on. But probably that's not their main motivation. They're really kind of motivated that I'm the big guy, I'm important.
The victimhood aspect of it as well. Do you want to touch on that a little bit? Because that's a very consistent thing of white people with lots of money acting like, oh, the world's against me, whilst picking on minority groups.
It's so unbelievably tiresome, isn't it? It's this complete inability to comprehend your own privilege. And you don't think about it, but, I'm middle-aged, reasonably affluent white person, I don't have any great concerns. I don't have to worry if a police car passes us in the car. And so I'm aware of the fact that other people have different experiences, and I have an imagination, so I can imagine those different experiences. But on a day-to-day basis, I'm not thinking about that. I will think about it if it's put in front of me. And I am prepared to concede the fact that my life now is a great deal easier than a lot of other people's lives. But some people seem incapable of admitting that they might have it a bit cushy, refusing to admit that other people's experiences might be harder. It's like the Four Yorkshiremen thing, isn't it? You can't possibly admit that anybody else's experience might have been more difficult than your own, and that therefore they might be entitled to a bit of fucking leeway.
Because if I was Lawrence Fox, I would be thinking, well, thank fuck the guy that played Inspector Morse could act, because I wouldn't have a job. You know, Graham Linehan had the utter privilege to work with actors that were unbelievably good.
Yeah.
Dylan Moran is somebody that Graham wouldn't have had to write a single letter, and Dylan Moran could have made the audience laugh. He had Bill Bailey working on Black Books. You know, the whole cast of Father Ted, is, I would argue strongly, unless they'd had the cast that they had, that wouldn't have worked. So rather than just going, maybe this isn't all about me, maybe it's not my writing alone that's really carrying this, it's everybody else I've had the pleasure to work with, and being a bit humble about it. No, I'm the fucking genius. I'm the one who carried it. It's all me. And then, as Free says there, the second that starts to reveal itself as not necessarily being true, you then have to segue into picking on minority groups and then getting your ego kick from that. And I think you've nailed it, Tucker, that it's a weak ego thing that seems to be at the core of it a lot. Because J.K. Rowling, I mean, she's not up front and centre with the rest of them, but there's a similar thing going on there where she's just maybe not that good a writer that kind of lucked out on a particular project. And rather than just saying, yeah, that's the situation, it's then become, no, I'm going to try and backfit all this progressive shit into the books that wasn't there to begin with. And then she's kicking off about the trans community, and you're like, just fucking accept it, that you landed on your feet. You got lucky.
And I think the thing that I find particularly irritating about Rowling, or Rowling, or however the fuck you say it, is that anytime she's in the newspapers for having suddenly decided that, you know, Dumbledore was gay, or Hermione was actually black and it's our fault for not having noticed. One of my children was a big fan when they were younger, and she keeps me abreast of exactly what the calibre of the bollocks is when Rowling comes out with any of these things. She says, no. It says here that, you know, Hermione was fucking white and ginger or whatever, right? But anytime one of these stories is out, it seems to me that it's when there's a Black Lives Matter story in the press, or that there's some other group. And I find myself thinking that actually what she really just is an attention seeker. And again, it's victim status, that she can't stand for anybody else to be getting any sympathy. You're unbelievably rich. Haven't you got better things to do? You could have just retired and been seen as this liberal benefactor authoress, and instead you've just ruined yourself on the internet. For what purpose? It's bizarre. Fragility of ego of just desperately needing the attention.
I get very triggered by this because I feel that these people work in artistic mediums. That's, again, very consistent. And I don't view them as artists, because if you were artists, you'd have put it in to begin with. Star Trek, they wrote in stuff. They did the first interracial kiss on TV. They did the first same-sex kiss. And it was in the script, deliberately there to make that statement. Even Joss Whedon doing Buffy the Vampire Slayer put a lot of really progressive stuff in there. The first really properly done lesbian relationship on television, and went to bat and fought the network tooth and nail to make sure that would happen. And this is in the 90s, and we're talking the same era that J.K. Rowling is writing Harry Potter. So to have not gone to bat and then backfitted it all in, I just think is pathetic. I mean, to sort of say, I'm all about feminism, women's rights, while deliberately picking a name that's gender ambiguous, and then also doing a bunch of crap crime novels written under a male name. Like, what? Whereas there were women out there that were writing television and writing film and the novels that were doing it to prove, like, women can do this, and women have been doing it for a very long time. Hercule Poirot was one of my favourite fictional characters ever. It wasn't written by a guy, and I hate the fact that on an artistic level these people try and act holier than thou, but if they really meant it would have been there. These are the kind of people that get into the business to make money. It's not really about the art or making statements or any of that shit. This is about a cash grab thing, and I will not be told otherwise.
I mean, with the crime novels, I think this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, which is that I think Rowling wrote those crime novels under a pseudonym, thinking that they were going to be incredibly successful, and then they weren't. And then, amazingly, it leaked that it was her, and so they sold. She was obviously hoping for a bit of ego stroking, because she's at that point where she writes anything and a load of fucking numpties are going to buy it. She wanted her ego stroked and she didn't get it. And rather than simply walk away from that, it's very Trumpian, actually. She just leaked it that it was her and then took the ego stroke anyway, even though she knew it was false.
I mean, the thing is that her work is derivative, to say the least. I mean, you can really look at things like The Worst Witch, and there's a Book of Magic and a bunch of other things where you can see that you just kind of recalibrated a bunch of other people's ideas. But this comes back to my money-making thing, where in the same way that when Twilight comes out, suddenly there's all these other vampire movies come out. And even things like 50 Shades started life as a Twilight fan fiction. And J.K. Rowling, that's kind of what you are. Other people did the hard work to get to this, and then you nicked their ideas, moved things around just enough, and then made money off of it. In the same way that 50 Shades took a bunch of the Twilight stuff and moved it around, the same way that Twilight took a bunch of that around. And that's fine. That's the nature of, for a lot of people, creativity. Originality doesn't exist. You just steal enough stuff and move it around enough, and hey-ho, there you go. But it's the humbleness that should come with that, and that's always with Graham Linehan. Really, it was your actors that were saving that shit. Your stuff actually wasn't that funny. It was the fact you had the perfect cast with this top-level people being involved in it that carried that. And that would just be
Moss have
nice.
been funny if it hadn't been Richard Ayoade playing him pitch perfect?
Yeah. And it's just be nice, be humble, say, like, yeah, that's what this is, and then we don't have a problem. But then the thing that really upsets me and upsets everybody is the fact that they then take it to that level of their ego still isn't satisfied even after that level of success. Or as you're highlighting here, maybe it's the fact that you lucked out and then suddenly you're challenged to, right, follow it up. You've done Harry Potter, what's next? And then you can't follow it up. And instead of just saying, maybe I'm just a one-hit wonder, maybe that's just it, the ego starts on the, I have to be a thing. I'm going to become the voice of women for the world. Like, I just can't relate to that. I find that really toxic and dislikable as a human trait.
A million years ago, I, for a few months, did a bit of stand-up comedy. It's really, really difficult doing stand-up comedy. I mean, you feel sick before you go on stage. And I'd had an experience where I'd actually just finished with my boyfriend, and I was booked to do 10 minutes, and I was absolutely not in the mood. And I went on and I was short because I just couldn't do it. And the guy that was organising the comedy night had no idea what was going on with me and no reason to know, but he complained that I hadn't done the full 10 minutes. And I had one of those beautiful little moments of clarity that I don't need this. I do not need the applause. I do not need to be liked this much that I subsume my own personal emotions just to be clapped at and laughed at. I don't need it, and I never did another show.
That's a shame, because it sounded like you finally worked it out. That's the beginning of the good shit right there, but yeah.
Yeah, of just knowing that you don't need to be loved that much. And it's one of the most useful experiences of my life, is realising that I don't need it. But what it does give me is an insight into all the people who do need it. Right? And so a lot of stand-up comedians are really damaged people. A lot of them have dead parents. A lot of comedians have lost their mum at an early age, for instance. And it really is that they are filling the void. That's definitely a thing. And so I find myself thinking that with people like this, they're filling the void, but with the wrong things. I mean, I think some people do just like feeling fucking sorry for themselves, don't they? Poor little me. Yeah, poor little you with your fucking villa in France. Fuck off.
I've had to work, but I'm very aware of how lucky I am. And the thing is, most things, when you actually look back at your life, stuff that worked, it is just dumb luck. Very rarely do you actually have a situation where there's a coherent line between work, success. Most of the things, like your partner you meet, the job you get, it is just dumb luck. And most successful people, if you look at like great musicians, great comedians, again, it's just a lot of it is just you happen to be in the right place at the right time. And it's not that there isn't work involved. There is. And writing is fucking hard. Respect that level of it if you are committed to sitting in front of a fucking keyboard for hours on end every day, plugging away a book, even if it's shit. Just the effort alone, that's admirable. But there still needs to be a humbleness that comes along with that. And I always think that the best artists, the best entertainers and performers or writers or anything else are always the people that at their core are fairly sound, confident people. They're not doing it for the please clap. Because even in film, a lot of time directors that do pacing, the confidence to do nothing, and this is something I think I've never done stand-up, but the comedians that I admire the most are the ones that actually have the guts just to not do much for a bit, like not actually do a joke. Like there's a gap in the laugh, whereas a lot of writers, it's like gag every second, it's like this, to the point where you're like, I don't fucking care, because it actually takes balls and genuine confidence, guts to stand there and just let that ride out. And that's what you were saying, Tucker, where once you get to the point of going like, I don't need you to clap. It's almost like I'm annoyed you're not doing stand-up now, because I'm like, that's it. Because all the fuckers that stand there and rattle off 1 million jokes a minute because they're terrified that the audience might be quiet for a little bit. Well, let's talk about social media. So now this has given people a grifting opportunity that would not have previously existed, because it's a relatively modern phenomenon. The Lawrence Foxes and Graham Linehans, like, you would not have been able to grift in this manner before. Do we want to talk about cancel culture? Is it these two things running into each other at high speed that has created the nightmare we're now in?
There seems to be a refusal to accept that people are complicated and not just black or white. You can't judge any person on the worst thing they've ever done, but you shouldn't judge them on the best thing they've ever done either. People are complicated, and simply writing off everything because of something problematic, there'll be nothing left. It'll be a wasteland. I mean, I think it's a Laurie Lee poem. She's talking about the end of a relationship. You've fallen out of love with somebody, and why must it all have been shit? Which is what tends to happen. You finish with somebody and they're the worst person in the world and you can't see anything good in it. And that's not productive, because you were with them at the time for a reason, and there will have been good things even with bad people. And so this inability to deal with human complexity is immature.
Yeah, it's nuance, and actually to come back to Matt Stone, Trey Parker, the writers of South Park, because I know I've brought that up, and I know there may be trans people listening to this and going, but those fuckers did a trans episode and it was offensive. But the thing about the episode, because I watched it, because I saw images of the episode they had done, and I was like, oh man, right, okay, so it's a guy doing the strongest woman contest. Oh dear, this is maybe not going to be good. But in the context of the episode, when we actually watch it, it's very, very clear that they're supportive of the trans community, but what they're trying to highlight is that what if there's a dickhead that exploits the current climate to infiltrate this contest? So the cis community and trans community both know that this is one isolated Cartman-esque dickhead taking advantage of things to benefit themselves, but the sensitivity around the debate prevents anybody from just saying what needs to be said. And there's a B storyline going on in the episode where the girls have formed their own board game club at the school, and it's a no boys allowed rule. And the whole show is discussing the absence of nuance in any of these conversations, whereas if we go and look at the nuance, we can get a result that benefits everybody. But because no one's willing to do that, and everything has to be black and white, take a side, jump to conclusions, react without thought, nobody wins. And you do not to defend Lawrence Fox or Graham Linehan, because they're wrong, but are they birthed by that culture? Is this a chicken and the egg thing of like which came first? And is that worth discussing?
There's always been dickheads, and before the age of social media, what would Lawrence Fox have been? What would he have done? When I first started hearing about him, I didn't even know who he was. Now, I used to love Inspector Morse when I was a teenager, and it's high production value TV. Morse is an interesting bastard. It was great TV, and I really enjoyed it. I love detective stuff anyway, real flaw of mine. And when Lewis came on TV, I wasn't as impressed with it, but I did kind of eventually watch most of it. And the Lawrence Fox character was just irritating to me, and I didn't really pay a great deal of attention to him, and so didn't know who he was or know his name as an actor. And so when all this stuff about him was coming out, I was like, who the fuck's this? And then you Google him, you're like, he used to be married to Billie Piper. Well, right, okay, fine. Like, who the fuck is he? And then I saw a photo of him and went, oh, he's the guy that ruined Lewis. Right? You know, he's the guy that made Lewis something that I didn't watch religiously because I found him annoying. And you just go, oh, right, it's that guy.
I don't even mean this in an insulting way, because acting is a profession and it's a spectrum. Not everybody gets to be Jack Nicholson. Not everybody gets to breathe the rarefied air of the A-list. There are plenty of actors that are just steadily working. Actually, often they're the best ones. They're always little side people doing character bits, and they steadily work. And he was one of those guys that you would have an idea of, I'm going to cast this character, and you probably have 10 actors in mind, and when you couldn't get them, you'd call Lawrence Fox or something like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. For most actors, that's fucking good, just to be in the run, you know, and that's who he is. But I get the impression that he would be really offended by me saying that. He'd be like, no, man, I'm great, and the reason why I can't get cast now is because of cancel culture. I'm like, no, it's not. It's just because you're not that good, and you were always going to be a heel because you just look dislikable. So unless we're casting for, like, English dickhead or American dickhead, we're not going to find any work for you.
He's just a bit smug. The thing that made Morse great was that he was by no means perfect. He was by no means an ideal character. He had all these problems, but you felt for him because you really believed in his loneliness. And he had all these attributes, and he was clever and all the rest of it, but he was broken by his own loneliness. And that was unbelievably good television. Whereas Fox gave that character, I can't remember his fucking name in the show.
That says it all right there. That in one line says it all. That if you can't remember the name of the character, that tells you how good a job he did. He's completely forgettable. That's it.
It was just not a three-dimensional and believable character. It was boring and annoying and smug, and it was a particular kind of public school boy smug that is really, really irritating. But anyway, we spent far too much time talking about him. He's so vain, he'll think this song is about him.
Yeah, I think we did start to discuss the relationship, though, between grifting and cancel culture, and I think that is probably something that's worth zoning in on.
Cancel culture is immature. It's this refusal to accept that sometimes good people do bad things and sometimes bad people do good things, and that you are allowed to be selective and say, I thought the Harry Potter films were great entertainment when I had kids to take to the cinema. That's fine. I am just bored of intolerance. So a really good example of this, actually, is after the election last December, a pal of mine had tagged me into a direct message group on Twitter. And I was actually up all night I was at the count, so I didn't pick up on anything at all at the time. And the next morning, when I did finally kind of get up and get on social media and stuff, I piled into this big chat. And immediately, one of the members of the chat started complaining about the fact that I had a little spider in my Twitter handle because she thought that meant that I was a TERF. And so I was like, no, it's Lady Hale because of the spider brooch and the decision not, regarding Parliament. So I explained it, which is, it annoys me that I explained it actually, because I should have just told her to go fuck herself. I did explain it, and then my explanation wasn't sufficient, and she wanted me to take that out, and I said, well, I'm not going to. Well, it means this to me. You can mean what I want to you, but I'm not changing myself to please you, which I thought theoretically this is meant to be, you want me to accept you for who you are with no argument and no questions, but you won't offer me the same thing. And so intolerance of that nature is what pisses off everybody else. And then that causes quite a lot of the Barneys.
I think so. I think just to clarify, though, that it is quite important that, although you said I wanted to tell this person to fuck off, I did actually explain it. And I think that that's the nuance within cancel culture, where if someone highlights a really shitty thing that you said 10 years ago, and most people alive probably said a shitty thing 10 years ago, that's inevitable, right? How you handle that, that's the key. Either you go like, well, I was steaming drunk and no idea what the fuck I was saying, or I've evolved my understanding. That is the right way to deal with it. Because I said this when we had Stephen Payton on the podcast. I said that to them when we discussed this in a pub previously to doing the podcast, that I didn't really know anything about trans and non-binary issues. I was completely clueless. And therefore I just stayed out of it. This discussion's been going on for years, and really prior to about 2016-17, I just stayed the fuck away from it, because I'm like, I don't know. In school we were told there were two genders, maybe there's more, I don't know. Stephen was very key, and I want to give Stephen credit for this. Stephen is non-binary, and now this is a human thing for me, and maybe that says something negative about my personality, where maybe I have to have a personal interaction of some kind to get the fire burning more with it. But then when it became, and I remember this moment distinctly when it was Stuart Campbell, Wings Over Scotland, having a pop at Stephen online, it was like, right, what the fuck is this? Because Stephen's just lovely. Just a nice human I would like to see more of in the world. That was the trigger point for me to go, I'm going to actually go and read about this issue, study it, and try and understand things. Let's do a podcast on it. And it's hilarious listening to that one back, because all three of us are sat there going, we don't know what the fuck we're talking about. But nonetheless, if 15 years ago I make a trans joke, not that I think I've ever done that, because it just wouldn't be where I would lean humour-wise anyway. But if I did, I would simply say that I've learned more and evolved as a person. So therefore, I probably wouldn't be cancelled, or I would walk up to the line of cancellation and people would be like, oh no, it's okay, he's walked it back, or something. But a lot of people don't seem to be able to do that. So to tie it back to Graham Linehan, it's like, rather than just going, I did a shitty episode of the IT Crowd, it becomes, damn it, my life is now to ruin trans people.
Line in the sand, you cross this line, you die.
And that's the thing that I think none of us can understand. So like what you're saying, Tucker, is completely correct. The key bit of that interaction to me was the bit where you actually went, no, I want to tell them to fuck off, but I'm going to handle this in a dignified manner. That's it. That's the difference between you and J.K. Rowling and everybody else.
As I said to Stephen, the trans issue is something that I don't want to have to give a fuck about because it doesn't affect me. But I really, really don't like other people sticking their fucking neb into other people's business. And so that's what seems to be happening to me. It doesn't affect you. Do you know who should decide what happens with regards to trans issues? Trans people. That's who. Everybody else, get your fucking coats. It's not complicated. Are you trans? No. Right. Fuck off. It's not up to you. It's just not up to you.
The one thing that I really wish the internet or men on the internet would stop doing is calling women misogynists. The number of times, Tucker, I've seen people tweet you saying you're a misogynist for supporting trans rights. My girlfriend gets it all the time because she's obviously
I've
a huge
probably
advocate
muted
for
all
it.
those accounts, so I probably just don't see it.
She'll be sat there like just laughing. Oh, there's another one saying you hate women. It's like, I am one.
At the moment, the trans issue is the new noisy frontier. It's where gay rights were in the 80s. And this is symptomatic of the fact that actually gay rights have reached a point where they're very stable. They're not absolutely perfectly stable, but they are so much more stable than they were 20 years ago. The frontier has moved. You can imagine what it was like trying to think about trans rights in 1985 under Thatcher. I mean, it's beyond comprehension, the suffering and damage, isn't it?
When Stephen was on the podcast, you talk about rolling back rights. Stephen pointed out they're starting with the T. Eventually that's going to be the G, the L, and the B. When they are talking about rolling back the rights, the rollback is going in the same order in which they appeared. So this is what you're saying, Tucker, where we'll try for gay rights first and we'll work up to trans because we can't hit all this at once. Now, we should have been able to do that. A decent, empathetic society would have been able to handle that, but Thatcher, right? So there we go.
I don't think that a lot of the people who are being really vocal about trans issues in a negative way actually really give a fuck. I think that it's a cynical political football to use and that nobody would give a fuck if not for a few vocal, noisy people. And I think the fact that it's being used in that way is the really, really annoying and sickening thing. So in much the same way that gay Sharia marriage in America is the thing that all the right-wing Republicans who get caught in toilets with boys are complaining about, it's become something that can be used as a rallying cry to divide a population.
I do want to say about the Joanna Cherry thing, and I will tread carefully on this one because we probably are going to get sued. I've seen her tweet, things like, you don't know what it was like to be a lesbian in the 80s. And I think that's completely valid for everyone that wasn't a lesbian in the 80s. That's a fair statement.
She's right, I don't.
To tie back to what you're saying here about the frontier and how things have moved, we didn't just go, well, now we got gay rights, that's it, job done. Like, that's not how that works. The LGBT were moving that forward. And I think that's where I have a real disagreement, I would assume. I have to be careful in what I'm saying now, in terms of a worldview with Cherry. That feels very pulling up the ladder to me. I see that in the same way that I see Priti Patel pulling up the ladder. The same way that Thatcher pulled up the ladder on women as well. And I'm not going to go any further because I'm sure people that follow the Angry Scotland account kind of know what we're all thinking here.
It's a proxy issue, isn't it? It's a proxy for another battle that's ongoing.
Yeah.
And you can use it as a way of finding out where people stand generally. I think it is quite a good issue to use to really see where someone's coming from generally in their outlook and attitude in the world. But factions are using it as a side issue.
It is this proxy issue, wedge issue, in much the same way that Republicans have used abortion in America. And what really worries me is that it will become a settled wedge issue as opposed to a transient wedge issue. And I'm really, really worried about it because I think it is bad for society long term if that's the case. And it is a grift. It really is genuinely just using people. People called Marjorie, 57, from fucking the West End, who's never fucking worried in her life as to whether or not there's a trans woman in fucking Marks and Spencer's changing rooms. But now all of a sudden, this is a fucking deciding issue for her. A, it's never happened to you. And B, you've never fucking worried about it, but now it's all you're voting on. That's a worry.
I think that's interesting, actually. Like, if you think of a character that's maybe not been interested in political issues or had particularly strong views about stuff, and they come across something like that and it interests them. And there's like a community that builds up around it of people kind of egging them on. It is a thing where you can fall into it and you make friendships and you get to know people and people are nice to you just all around one single issue. So you can see how people get into it and get enthused by it because there's a whole group around you.
Since the beginning of doing even the Angry Salmons parody account, that was me and my pal Pete. And we had a lot of chats about the monetizing of this. And I was very vocal in my opinion that we shouldn't monetize it because it was a political thing. And if we were just hawking pink berries or whatever it would have been, as a lot of people in the Yes Movement who have made a lot of fucking money off of this thing have done, the risk you take with doing that is, yes, your bank balance is improved, but you also can get trapped by your audience. Because what happens is that the diehards are always going to be the one that give you money. So the ones that are most susceptible to a cult of any kind. The biggest marks are going to be the ones that give you the cash. The problem with those marks is that if they start leaning right and they start leaning anti-trans, if you're in a situation where all your money is coming from them, so all three of us doing this podcast, we have our own jobs, we have our own lives, we choose to do this as a fucking form of therapy more than anything else. So we don't have that issue, so we can just say shit, and if you don't fucking like it and you don't listen, well, we don't really give a shit. Whereas other people, you know, the Yes Movement, the National even is in that predicament. They've leaned into the Wings Over Scotland approach because that's where the money comes from. These are the people that are most likely to go out and buy nationalist marching kits and buy your paper every day, die-hard loyalty to it. But the problem you get into is if that audience starts to move, in order to survive, you have to move with them. And that's where there's a third category of grift. I'm not going to give Wings the credit, because I never liked Wings from day one. But even if Stuart Campbell started off all right, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. I think to anyone objectively, they can see how that has moved. And to me, that's a result of financial dependence on an audience that is toxic. And I'm probably going to get a lot of shit for that, but I think that's completely right. And I think the National has actually ended up in a similar thing, where if it had swung for the fences and had aimed for the mainstream audience, they could be a lot more representative about what the broad church of the Yes Movement's actually like. Whereas now they're in a situation of, well, we sort of need to keep putting forward certain writers to keep playing into this shit because that's what's making us money. That, I think, is an interesting third category to the grift, where you become a grifter by a mistake because you didn't just go, no, this is my principles and I'm not changing them. The second you waver and go, all right, but if I might get more money doing that, you're fucked.
And I think the people who are still on Twitter talking about Scottish independence are the 4 a.m. in the kitchen at the party crowd. And I know I've said this before, but, you know, there are a whole load of other people at this party and they went home hours ago at sensible times. And the next time there's a party, they'll be back. But they're not here now. It's just pissed arseholes in the kitchen. The other people will be back to the party and the party will be nice again.
The party's still good. The party isn't bad, but as you say, it's those people.
It's 4 a.m. and all that's left is Pringles and some sort of weird spicy liqueur. It won't all be Campari and damp Pringles forever. There will be white wine and cheesy nibbles again.
I always looked at Wings as a bit of like, oh man, that's a bit shit. The block list really got me. That genuinely pissed me off. It's one thing to spout your own opinion, but to develop a system in which people, when they first join Twitter and they first look to get involved in Scottish independent stuff on Twitter, unquestionably Wings was one of the first things you're going to bump into. And if you installed that block list, people like us just go bye-bye. I'm not bitter for us, but I'm bitter for a lot of people that were on that list, like Tristan Gray's a really, really good follow working for the Greens, and there's a whole bunch of people, Stephen Payton would have been on it too. Just someone coming in on day one going, hey guys, what's this all about? Is just deprived of an entire litany of voices just instantly. And that I really objected to. Because I think that, you know, if you put us side by side and, you know, you pick your side and you say, well, I'm more like this, that's my bit of the movement. I think that's fair. But I mean, to rig the deck in that manner where you're just like, fuck you, I'm going to create an echo chamber.
Well, that's what fascists do.
I mean, it's like, there's no way to frame that in a way that it is morally good. If you wrote a character in a film or a TV show, that would be seen as a heel move. It's a villainous move. it disappoints me that the movement doesn't have the objectivity, or setting wings, if it doesn't have, no pun intended, has the objectivity to see how toxic that is. To be judged on your own merits. If you don't want to listen to this podcast and you think we all talk shit on Twitter, that's your prerogative. Good for you. But at least you have the opportunity to read it and you have the opportunity to hear it. Whereas he actively tried to take that away. And I think it's terrible that the National then promoted him afterwards.
Okay, listen, that's what authoritarians do. They try and remove dissenting voices. But not everybody is interested in following authoritarians.
Scottish independence is a good thing. Yes, it's a good idea. We should vote for it. But even on the side of good, these people can weasel their way in. Because they're not all right-wingers. There's a lot of this going on the left as well, taking advantage of people in this manner.
Authoritarianism isn't right-wing or left-wing. Authoritarianism is just about control. I don't think we'd have any disagreement in saying that Stalin was pretty authoritarian. There wouldn't be a great deal of difference on the ground living under Pinochet or living under Stalin. The right and the left at their extremes are complete mirror images of each other.
Two cheeks of the same arse.
That doesn't make us centrists. And this is another tactic that's started to emerge now, is if you're the guy that says that actually the far left and the far right are both terrible, suddenly you're a centrist. It's like, no, I'm just saying they're shit.
I view myself completely comfortable as a centrist, and I have no issue with describing myself as that because I don't like either extreme. I don't see what else you call yourself other than a centrist if you don't like the extremes.
I think the language is actually the difficulty. Trying to discuss these very nuanced and complicated issues with a very basic language like English is quite difficult, because I don't actually like the term left, right, centre, because there are certain issues where I'm extremely libertarian on, like the government should have nothing to do with that, and other issues where I'm like, the government needs to be involved the whole way through. So I don't think I actually fit into any of these things, and I don't think you could say that I'm a centrist because of that. I just think that the whole scale doesn't work.
Perhaps there's something I'm missing. I don't understand why the idea of being moderate is considered a bad thing.
Well, people can conflate it with being like a sellout, compromising real hardcore beliefs just to get power or whatever. Because, you think of your main centrist politicians, you think of guys who would be considered sellouts.
It speaks to a very white Western, I want it now mentality. I'm going to play the Star Trek card here and say that that is a TV show, and throughout its iterations has done a very good job of articulating a very long timeline. And what it's saying is this doesn't happen overnight. There isn't just one moment of, the humans met the Vulcans and it was all fine after that. The whole ethos of Star Trek is that it's the struggle itself that makes it all worthwhile. That you might not live to see the day when the good thing happens, but you need to be part of the chain to get there. So I don't think you are a moderate. I think you just have the wisdom to understand that you can't do everything at once. So actually you do want the radical utopia. It's just that you know that you need to take the steps to get there, as opposed to one guy gets elected and that's it. It also comes back to, I guess, what we're saying about the LGBT community, that again, that's something that John Cherry says, you don't know what it's like to be a lesbian in the 80s, but that highlights that what being a lesbian now is like is not the same as the 80s. It's that progressive thing. And I totally understand the frustration, and particularly when you are young and you are very idealistic, and we're all still idealists at heart. Yes, we should just be able to elect Superman that can come in and just do everything that we want at once. Yes, that would be wonderful. But there is a kind of realistic understanding that it has to be in steps. Now, that means that people like us that are vocal supporters of trans rights and so forth, we have to be part of that step. So it's important, but we need to focus on the step, that's it. But we're not deluded to the point that we think Nicola Sturgeon's going to come in and just fix everything, or whoever it might be. That it's understanding that the groundwork needs to be focused on each little step to get to the utopia we're going to. There is something that politics absolutely plays into with human nature, where that hope that this one person, Jeremy Corbyn, Barack Obama, Nicola Sturgeon, whoever it is, Joanna Cherry, Alex Salmond, they'll do all of it and create the world. Whereas I think we just know it's like, well, no, that's not how that fucking shit works. And you're a complete mark if you think that is how it works. It's not how it works. You stick to your principles and over time shit will slowly get better. But when I say mark, I mean tying back into the grifter thing, because that's what these people are so good at exploiting. That's exactly the vein they're tapping into to get the money.
Well, this is exactly what we've talked about before, isn't it? Simple answers to complex questions. That's exactly the Nigel Farage or the Dominic Cummings 3-word slogan. Simple answers to complex questions. Confident people confidently telling you that all we have to do is X are always either stupid or liars or both. Because there are no simple answers to complex problems. And almost all problems are complex.
People you see on Facebook now that maybe deep down they know it's bullshit, but they're so in the cult, and I don't even feel like I've got a handle on where we are as a society anymore. Are humans now at the point where they don't actually care what's true? They just want to forward whatever version of reality that they prefer.
If you were to go into Germany in the mid-50s, how many people do you think would admit to having been Nazis? People can fall under a spell. And unfortunately, it happens time and time again, whether it's religion, whether it's politics. People sort of fall into these cult-like silos. And some people won't ever leave, but they're a really small percentage of the population. But a lot of people will gradually realise, they'll quietly move their position, and they will probably just never admit even to themselves that they once held a different position. To a certain extent, sometimes they won't even remember, because there's a distinct chance that there will be a lot of scandals come out, for instance, with Trump. And I think an awful lot of people will simply justify on the basis of the news that comes out the change in their opinions. Oh, well, I never knew X. And they'll be fine with that, and they'll rationalise the whole thing, and they'll move on, and it can get better. That's what I hope for.
I'm very fascinated by Alex Jones on a number of levels, but I think that the InfoWars and what he's been able to, and do I use the word achieve? But the fact that he has been a chameleon in how he's managed to fuck with narrative with his audience is mystifying to me. It's absolute Vince McMahon pro wrestling logic. The whole framing of Kennedy's assassination and his take on that, and lamenting the death of the Kennedys, even though the Kennedys represented everything that Alex Jones would seemingly hate. I mean, Bobby Kennedy was into surveillance. He was into phone tapping because he was taking on the mob. And all the shit that Jones would not have liked, but the way he was able to twist all that round, almost making you think that Kennedy was somehow representative of the more right-wing libertarian America that he would like. Then 9/11, and all the conspiracies about 9/11, inside job, bombs in the building, fucking holographic planes, all this other crazy shit they were saying. And then when everybody believed it for a bit, and then we all did research and realised that, well, obviously that wasn't fucking what happened. And then it's the next thing. The Sandy Hook was the ultimate thing for Jones. When that was bullshit, you are a fucking liar, you scumbag, that would have been it. But his ability just to keep going, because the moment we're in December 2020, we are finally hearing word of a vaccine for this fucking COVID virus, the pandemic that's going on. And right now, there's a lot of people on the internet going, we're having to take this vaccine so we lose our arms and legs and we'll all be chipped so Bill Gates can follow us around, because Bill Gates really wants to follow your gran in the fucking nursing home around 80 years old or whatever. But eventually, we are going to be injected with this shit, and either of these people are going to be proven right, and we are all going to be like limbless fucking blobs with chips in our heads or whatever else, or it's going to be proven to be a lie. And I am fascinated to see what the next thing's going to be and how they rationalise the step. Because when you're 22, you're like, oh, this is a bit fucked up. But then when you get to like 33 and you're looking back going, I remember when that guy was on about 9/11. I remember he was on about Sandy Hook. But he's still going. And somehow that audience has just evolved their thinking. So what happens now when it's proven that Bill Gates had fuck all to do with this vaccine? and it wasn't a global conspiracy. Where does that go next? And what do these people think?
Firstly, they just won't acknowledge it. You just can't reason with people who won't actually deal with facts. You can't. And so if you're not transacting in facts to begin with, they are just lost to you, and they'll just completely continue to disappear down whatever the next rabbit hole is. I mean, with regards to COVID, the vaccine's going to be coming online to an extent that the vulnerable populations have finally all been dealt with by the end of spring going into summer, at which time the virus would be naturally on the wane anyway. We can clearly see that it's been seasonal. We've had very little over the summer as everywhere opened back up, and then as soon as the crap weather hits, and Australia in reverse, Joe, they're going into their summer now and their levels have plummeted. They'll simply say that the virus has gone away because it's the summer, and they won't admit that the vaccine had anything to do with it. And a lot of them won't get it, and then a lot of them will get COVID and die. Because it's all the same people who won't listen to any health advice, who won't take care of themselves. They're all the same people that won't pay attention to basic science. There was a nurse who's up in one of the Dakotas who was saying she had Trump Republican voters on her ward who were shouting and screaming with the last breath that they'd got that Bill Gates had given them something and demanding whatever Trump had been given, and they both believed and didn't believe that they had the COVID and that there wasn't a cure and all the rest of it, and she was shattered.
It's going to be interesting to see how we deal with this moving forward, and how maybe through education or whatever we can attempt to correct this. But it does seem to be quite a hardwired and human thing. It seems to be quite hardwired, and that capacity to leap beyond logic is almost our greatest asset, because we're able to imagine and do weird and wacky things. But it's also our worst quality, because it means when reality is staring us in the face, we have the absolute ability to deny it. And I'm very fascinated by how we deal with that en masse.
We evolved as primates in tribes, and protecting your tribe was what protected us, because we're vulnerable animals. And so the protection of the pack, as it were, is what gave us strength. It's that instinct that you're seeing. But unfortunately, in the modern world that we live in, where we can pick our tribes on the internet, the protections that offers come with much bigger downsides.
The awareness of psychopathy, because we do love talking about psychopaths in this podcast.
I fucking love psychos.
Yeah. I mean, you were married to one.
Yeah.
You know, if I want to cut any of this out, let me know. You know,
No,
I think I was in a relationship with one, and you don't deny they exist, but you think, nah, there can't be that many of them. They can't be around, and they can't be like fucking with your shit. But they are. And that's been something that I've had to really realise, and it's been really the last sort of 3 years coming to terms with that reality of, that's the problem with us, because we are a herd mentality species. So we assume that the psychopath is one of us. They're one of the herd. They wouldn't hurt us, but because they're a psychopath, they're like, I don't give a fuck about the herd. And that's something that I think it goes against your own nature to believe that somebody like that could exist, because you're not trained to believe that they're out there. And I do hope that changes, because people should be given defence training, especially in politics and TV and film and so forth, like to counteract the grifter shit. Kids need to be warned off. They're not morally bad, they're just different to us, and they are real.
They're morally empty. There's a documentary on Netflix, I think it's The American Family Next Door or something like that. So a woman and her kids had disappeared, and it's brilliant. It's all viewed through social media posts and things like that. It's almost entirely consists of text messages, Facebook posts and things like that, and it's superb. But what you realise is that this guy had murdered his family. He had had a very comfortable, easy life, and there had been nothing to indicate that there was anything particularly the matter with him. But he was in a relationship with somebody else. His decision-making process, instead of I need to admit to my wife that I need to leave her, was to just murder her and his 2 children, which is devastating. And again, he was a bit of a grifter, and he was a little bit empty, and you can sort of see it in the video footage of him, that he's somebody who's just reflecting back to her, the person that she wants to see, and has had quite a nice lifestyle. This reminds me of a joke. There's a German baby, and he's adopted, and he doesn't speak. And years go by, and he doesn't speak. And eventually, one day, his mother gives him some apple strudel, and he tastes it and says, "This isn't very nice." And his mother is absolutely blown away that he's finally spoken. And she's, "What is it?" And he says, "Well, up until now, everything has been satisfactory." But that mentality that some people just quietly there, and as long as everything's fine, they're not dangerous. But the minute something isn't fine, they can be really dangerous. And so Donald Trump, to bring us back to where we started, Donald Trump is someone for whom his entire life everything has always been fine. There's never been anything that couldn't be fixed with money and a lawyer. Everything's always been fine. And right now, everything isn't fine. And it's really, really dangerous. It's incredibly dangerous. This is the point at which men murder their partners when they're about to lose their families. And I don't like making those comparisons, but I think it's appropriate. The point at which everything isn't fine anymore for those sorts of people are where you really, really need to watch.
When things aren't fine, how do you deal with it?
Yeah.
And this cancel culture, the relationship between that and grifter culture, we've identified that everyone's going to have said some stupid shit. I mean, there's levels of stupid shit you can say, but probably all of us will look back and go, well, I didn't know what the fuck I was talking about 15 years ago when I said that. It's how you handle being called out for that stuff. And if you're able to say, I put my hands up, yeah, fuck that up, didn't know what I was on about, I've learned a lot since then, I'm okay now. I don't think any human, any rational human is going to be like, oh no, he's a prick, or she's a prick, or they're a prick. They would just accept that, yeah, that's the nature of the beast, that you learn by doing and going along, you get better. But the people, as you say, that are the ones to watch, they're psychopaths. So when shit doesn't go their way or goes in an unexpected way, they act out because they don't understand how to handle it in the empathetic manner that the rest of the tribe would. And that's something that I always just thought, like, there's good and evil, there's like the bad guys and the good guys, and there's that. But that's not how it works, actually. There are people that you can meet and you think they're good people. And then, as you say, something will happen and suddenly they become a completely different thing. And that's a really fascinating thing. But I think it's something that we're not educated on, we're not taught about. And I mean, the fact that there are people out there that are given to people like Lawrence Fox as opposed to donating to cancer charities and shit, I just think is fucking bonkers. I mean, for God's sake, people, there's better stuff to chuck your money at than these dumb bastards, you know what I mean? I mean, it does seem to be a relatively male-dominated thing. Give the women some credit here. Like, it does seem to be mostly blokes that are in on this.
Straight white men have basically had it their own way for quite a long time. And the second that the world starts to move to a position where there might be a little bit more balance for everybody else, there is a particular sort of hardened end of the straight white male element that goes, but I liked it when I had everything my way. Yeah, well, tough shit, we've moved on. And their sense of grievance is that it doesn't all belong to them anymore.
I think so. And it's also that when the playing field is levelled, it's that fear that actually if the world was fair and balanced, I might not do very well. And there's some people that can humbly say, and this is right back to what I was saying in the beginning about some of these writers and that are out there and actors, that it's fine. You're just not that great. Not everyone can be great. Very, very few people get to be like Muhammad Ali. Not everybody gets that. Most of us get shit. Like, you get nothing. So if you're kind of like middle tier, it's fine. Accept it. You did pretty well. You lucked out. But there are some white people that just can't hack the fact that they're not special. And there is that lingering fear that if this was levelled and this was fair, you would get eaten alive. And that's definitely what's fueling a lot of this.
These guys, these fragile narcissists, are pathetic and
they are
stupid and wrong. So that is sometimes their undoing. I mean, if you think back in some of the early hangers-on to Donald Trump's campaign, guys like Milo, do you remember Milo?
Oh, yeah.
Steve Bannon is potentially going to jail at the moment. Milo lost all his money and basically his whole grift is basically down the tubes as soon as they lost his place in a lot of the social media platforms. And that happens a lot of the time. These guys get kicked off platforms, folk just move on to other stuff, or just they become bored with it. So a lot of the time these guys are their own undoing. The other thing is also that because they are stupid, narcissistic, bad, they become toxic themselves, and then the things that they promote are discredited and become seen as stupid. So there is a kind of flip side here where these folk actually can play into our hands by just undoing themselves. So you've always got that hope. I think that'll probably be the case when, in 10 years' time when folk look back at like the Scottish independence thing and like who were the good and bad characters in that. I think with that bit of distance and having seen what folk have gone on to do, I mean, Salmon, for instance, going on to RT. I mean, that's a prime example of someone just being so full of themselves they just undo themselves and make themselves look like a complete tit. So I think we give these guys too much credit sometimes because, Trump has been so successful and we've seen people actually do the graft quite well, but most of them don't actually. Most of them are failures, and if social media platforms are going to consistently do this, kicking folk off when they're out of order, then the graft can only go so far.
Katie Hopkins is a great example because now she's not on Twitter. I almost never hear anything about her because Twitter was where she was being horrible. So to a certain extent, actually, it's worth accelerating the point at which these dickheads get themselves knocked off the platform. They always think that this is about them, that it's about their charisma, and that they think their tribe will follow them. But actually, the tribe likes the environment. And if the leader leaves, they'll just pick another leader. So Lawrence Fox is the new Katie Hopkins, isn't he? He's filling that space of the current dickhead online saying the stuff that everybody goes, would you fucking stop retweeting that into my timeline, you dick? The mistake they make is in thinking that they're special and that their followers will follow them. But actually, mostly, they don't. Everybody just stays put. They go away, and another fucking goose takes the front of the flock, takes the flak for a while, and then gets dropped out. Next. Next.
Well, it's like an alcoholic going to a bar, isn't it? I mean, if you're an alcoholic and you like the bar and you like the alcohol, just because they changed the barman doesn't matter. Like it's the environment that you're going there because you want that fix. Yeah. It's like, need my hit of racism for the day. Who can I go to? Oh, there's Lawrence. Let's see what the fuck he said. That's all it is. So,
absolutely. So, I think Free's absolutely right. These people undo themselves. And so, to a certain extent, it is actually worth kicking up shit about them because that accelerates the moment at which they undo themselves. They feed off it, get themselves into a frenzy, and then use the N-word, get booted off, fuckety bye, next.
So are we in agreement on that then? So we should talk about them, we should dunk on them and shit on them and screenshot them and go look at this fucking crap. Because there seems to be a bit of discourse online at the moment of how we handle this.
Yeah, well, I think you do that. You can talk about them, but you shouldn't stoop to their level.
Yes.
I mean, they've got a certain type of discourse, certain way of talking that's just not acceptable, I think.
What they're very clever at doing is getting you to debate an issue that doesn't exist often. So where it's race or trans issues or anything like that, they'll come in and it'll be like, come on, have a go. Whereas if you just go like, no, you're a piece of shit, I'm not going to fucking interact with you. I'll screenshot all the dumb fucking shit you say and go, look at this dumbass. The framing of, I just want to debate, is just a smoke screen for what they're actually doing, which is the grift.
Yeah.
And that's blatant. But unfortunately, there's a lot of marks out there that will buy into that. And then that's when you get into the Twitter army thing, the pylon thing, where people get so wrapped up in particular characters that the replies are just dozens of these people going like, no, so-and-so's the best thing ever, on behalf of a grifter going in to defend the grift.
One of the first people to do that was Rowling. She did that a lot. And, she had something ridiculous, like 6 million followers or something. And people took to literally not using her name and saying things like, she who must not be named, making a Voldemort joke. Because she was searching for her own name on Twitter and then getting her followers to essentially pile on. So you've got 12-year-olds in fucking Korea piling on because some fucking Scottish mammy said something rude about J.K. Rowling because she's anti-indie. And you're just like, have you not got anything better to do? If I were you, I'd be in a fucking mega yacht going around the world. What's fucking wrong with you?
You know what, actually, Tucker, for years I've thought, what is it about J.K. Rowling that gets me in some ways more than the others? And it's the children's author thing. The way you said that there, that you've got 12-year-olds hitting in the replies, that's what makes that almost a next level of wrong. Because when you've got like a bunch of dumbass boomers that are 1 foot in the grave buying into this shit, that's like one aspect. But when you've got like an innocent 12-year-old that just happened to enjoy your book about a wizard school is now online replying to people going, trans people don't exist, or whatever it is that they're fucking advocating because she did a stupid blog. Man, that's really fucked up.
Obviously, I'm in favour of the free market, so I think if someone's selling you some product, that's different from just your standard grift of give me £5 a month to my Patreon. So buying stuff, so like I don't mind folks selling products as much. There's quite a lot of good stuff, like the indie crowd, like, you know, cartoonists and that, and folks selling prints of photography and things like that and artwork. I really like all that stuff actually. Not that I buy much of it, but things like that I think are good. So we don't sound like we're being mean to anyone who's making any money. Like, you know, I think being a writer or an author or whatever, writing articles and things like that, yeah, if you're making money off of that, go for it. But make sure you're doing it for genuine reasons. Or at least having a laugh.